Kundalini Awakening, a personal experience of Samadhi with Richard Lawrence. That's what we're here to explore in this very special awakening chat. And many of our viewers are interested in Kundalini Awakening experiences and elevated mystical experiences like Samadhi. Many of our viewers, like myself, have studied the great teachings of spiritual leaders like Paramahansa Yogananda, Dr. George King, and others who've had amazing Samadhic experiences. But these spiritual leaders have passed on, and we are not in a position to ask them any questions about their experiences, so we can learn more about this exalted state and how to attain it. But here today we have Richard Lawrence. We're truly blessed to have him, a real alive flesh and blood person who we can question, we can talk to, and he can share his experiences, who has worked very hard over the last many decades in this lifetime and no doubt previous lifetimes to gain this highly elevated state of consciousness, an advanced Kundalini awakening experience known as Samadhi, what Richard humbly describes as dipping his toe into the ocean of Samadhi and knowing God. So I thought it would be highly valuable to have this recorded discussion with Richard about his experiences, his direct experiences of Samadhi, for two major reasons. One, to provide rare and valuable insights for our viewers to help them better appreciate what Samadhi is and hopefully inspire them to take active steps towards their own advanced Kundalini awakening experiences of Samadhi. Two, to highlight and promote the fact that Samadhi can be attained through practicing King Yoga, the spiritual pathway named after Master of Yoga, Dr. George King. Now, it's important to highlight that Samadhi is a very difficult state of consciousness to attain. I have not attained this myself. I've still got a very long way to go. And very few people on earth have actually experienced this highly advanced Kundalini awakening state of Samadhi. At present, I'm not aware of anyone else who is alive now who claims to have experienced Samadhi. If any of our viewers know of anyone who has claimed to have experienced Samadhi, please do let us know. Enlightenment is synonymous with Samadhi, would you say, Richard?
Well, I'm sorry, going to have to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
going to have to disappoint you.
Okay,
baby.
okay.
I'm sorry. But and I know it's not what people really want me to say, baby, but I'm not claiming to be an adept. I'm not claiming to be a master. I'm not claiming to be an enlightened being or anything like that at all. I haven't attained Samadhi in the way that our master, Dr. George King, attained it and the way he described it. I'm not at that level. What I have done is I've dipped my toe in the ocean of Samadhi. I have reached a point where I know God in that state. Well, I was in that state, which I've had once, only once, and that was 6 months ago now, roughly. And I know you've been waiting patiently because I haven't really felt qualified to do this in this depth. But I think a couple of things I would say. The key thing that you said there that I would absolutely, completely authenticate, back up, is that this path of King Yoga really does work. And that might be why I've had the experience. And therefore, that's the only reason I'm talking about it at all, because otherwise I'd be at far too preliminary a stage, I feel, to be even talking about it. But I have had it. I've entered what you could certainly call an enlightened state, yes. Raised the Kundalini to a degree, but not in its entirety, to the Christ Center, and learnt many things along the way. And it's all a result of King Yoga. So that's my little intervention there.
Sure,
I don't want anyone to think I'm something really special. I've still got numerous things to learn. And I'm, Dr. King was an avatar. I'm just an ordinary bumbling terrestrial person. The big thing that comes absolutely trumpeting through the teachings of King Yoga, of the Aetherius Society, of the Cosmic Masters, of Dr. George King, is service, service, service is the way. And service is also the way to gain enlightenment, and that's, I suppose, one of the messages of today, this chat. But service is the absolute cornerstone, but it would be wrong, and this might surprise some people, to say that King Yoga is the same thing as karma yoga, because it isn't. King yoga includes Jnana yoga, Bhakti yoga, Raja yoga. You could say elements of Kundalini yoga, not the physical elements, they're not encouraged, but certain elements of it. Mantra yoga, and I could go on, Mudra yoga. It contains many yogas. But what it does is place karma on the pedestal at the top. And that's the reorientation, which a lot of the old teachings didn't do. And they had this strange selfishness about them. And that's really odd. But a little bit along the lines, like, I just want to get enlightenment, get nirvana, and get out of here. And it's all for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know what will happen to anyone else. But it won't matter then, because I'll be back with Brahma, or however they looked at it. Yeah. And that there is a selfish streak in that, which I think will stop them getting there. But there are others who would do it. For example, the yogi Milarepa, in 10th century, I think he lived in 10th or 11th century, Tibetan yogi, who said he was going to achieve adeptship. I think he called it adeptship or samadhi, whichever, for the sake of the world.
Right.
Now, if you do it for that motive, and you know that's the best thing you could do for the world, then that's the only reason to do it. But the idea, I mean, again, and you come to the great intelligences, and the Master Jesus has so brilliantly depicted this. The more elevated they get, the galaxy itself, I mean, it doesn't get more elevated than that in manifestation, really. Well, that and the supreme lords of creation, which are the energies throughout the universe, you could say that's in manifestation, but in a different way. But actually, in a manifested form, the galaxy is absolutely sacrificing, because a galaxy is waiting for everything within it, which is you, me, and the planets and the suns.
Amazing. To
gain the experience that we require before it moves on. It's a total nonsense to focus on your own enlightenment to the exclusion of others. It makes no sense. It's an unenlightened thing to do.
Definitely.
So the big change that King Yoga has brought is to put service, I think, in its rightful place. And then as an adjunct to that, it gives us ways of serving which have never been given before, which are far, far more powerful than any previous ways of serving. And it takes karma, turbocharges karma yoga, and makes it something that's never been seen on earth before.
Like Operation Sunbeam is a world saver, then helps to reduce the severity of earthquakes, and we've got Saturn mission as well, which saves thousands of lives each time it's done. And it's a very unique form of service.
I came across somebody this week, actually, who's thinking of moving home from one part of the country to another, not because they want to live in this other part of the country, but because there they can do Operation Prayer Power. Now that's a great act of service.
100%.
And that must affect, you know, they don't do it for themselves, but it must affect themselves. There's no sort of disparity between the two, really.
Enlightenment is an essential milestone on the spiritual journey for all of humanity, an experience that we will all sooner or later enjoy. It's a state that is made to happen, as the spiritual master Mars Sector 6 stated in the 9 Freedoms, and I quote, "The freedom, enlightenment, is the fruit which can be cultivated in the spiritual garden of terrestrial man, if he tends it with sufficient care, sufficient kindness, sufficient patience, sufficient tolerance, if he tends it with intelligence, if he tends it by manipulating his karmic pattern, through the right service, this will grow, blossom, and will bear all fruits." End quote. And according to a Buddhist website, which I looked at the other day, the Lord Buddha reportedly stated about his enlightenment, and I quote, "Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute." Please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and break down for us what steps you took to dip your toe, as you say, in the ocean of Samadhi?
First of all, I think I'm glad you quoted from the Fourth Freedom, because it makes it absolutely clear that this is something people can do. And also it makes it clear that it's not just going to happen. You've got to set out to do it. You don't have to set out to do it, but it won't happen unless you make it happen. That's something I realized completely. And this only happened to me because I reached a point where I thought, look, I've got to do this. And I set out to do it. It was a very inconvenient time. It was actually the night before I was flying to America for an important visit there to do with the audio book of The King Who Came to Earth and other projects. And I literally did it the night before because I knew this is it. I've been leading up to it for some months. The full account of it is on my website, and it's under a tab, Kundalini Diaries. Explain what I did. I wouldn't advocate anyone else. I'm not setting myself up as a teacher of Kundalini at all. Follow the practices as I've done for decades in realize your inner potential. And in my case, all of them really, but the one that I really focused on for a long period was the breathing exercises with the Kundalini visualizations. However, to answer your question, it's service. Service is the absolute key, and that's also a promise made in the 9 freedoms, actually in the 3rd freedom, that through service, the Kundalini will rise in natural, unforced fashion. Now that's a big, big difference right there between what happened to me and, say, what happened to Dr. George King. He didn't, first of all, achieve his samadhic condition through service primarily. He didn't need to. As I said earlier, he was an avatar. He didn't have the samskaras, as you might call it, of the past life experiences on this earth. He came and bore karma, yes, but he didn't bring all those habits and bad mind patterns that we generate through the lives, and he went straight to it and cut straight through to it, but he didn't do it through service. So I think that again is one reason why I felt I must come out, as it were, and say this, because I don't think it's been demonstrated through this path before. I don't know of anybody who's demonstrated it through this path.
Neither do I. Yeah.
So to answer your question, what I did was, and I'm not blowing my trumpet here at all, because I'm certainly not the only one who's done this sort of thing. But in my particular case, I know that Dr. King very, very quickly required of me to take on a lot of responsibilities. I don't think everybody has to do that, by the way. It all depends on your own pattern. The key is to take all the opportunities to serve with which you're presented. So very briefly, I came in as soon as it was actually possible for me. I joined the staff, so I became a staff member, full staff member, at the age of 22, a trainee at the age of 21. I became an SER what we now call a task force member at the age of 22, which I don't think even could happen now, but it did happen then. I was on the committee, I think at the age of 23 in London, much to the consternation of some of the long-term committee members in London at the time, I think, because Dr. King put me there, and so on. I became secretary at the age of 26, and a director and a bishop at the age, I think, of 33, and so on. So it all happened very quickly for me in terms of being given these opportunities to serve. The key, I think, is to take them all, whatever they are, and we're all different, certainly don't have to have a sort of pattern like that, but to take them all, everyone that's presented. I'd make that the biggest thing. And we have this wonderful aphorism, which is the motto of Dr. George King, taken from both Mars Sector 6 and the Mastery Theories: choose well, stand fast, know God. I call it be right, be left, be all. Because if you do the right thing, and it doesn't just start at the beginning, by the way, it doesn't just mean becoming a member and staying a member. You should do that, but of the Aetherius Society, in King Yoga, it means taking all the opportunities that you can take.
Sure.
And we're all different in that regard. And then not leaving them. So, standing fast. And that's not unique to me, certainly, but it's fairly unusual. Some people, though, will come back. They'll leave and come back, and that's fantastic. But so that's being left.
Right.
It's still there.
Sure.
And then I say be all, which is knowing God. So it's choose well, stand fast, know God. And it did occur to me, look, I've done this for a long time. I've been given the highest positions probably that anyone ever will be given, I suppose, because they were given to me by Dr. King. Every position I've been given, he gave me, including my consecration as a bishop and all the mission positions and everything else. There's nothing I've been given since his lifetime. I already had all those positions then, which was a great honour. It was a test, of course, and a trial at times. And I've made mistakes. I want to stress this. I've made mistakes in my life, definitely. And I've made mistakes in my work, definitely. But I've never left the positions.
Right.
And I've stayed with it, and I'm still batting away. Mm-hmm. I do turn to people like your good self and others and say, look, I'm actually 70. Would it be a good idea for me to step back? And I'm told no, no. And so I won't. I don't want to, but I certainly would if there was a feeling, look, come on. So I'm still batting away. And I think that's the real key, and this great promise that if you serve, Kundalini will rise in an unforced fashion has happened to me. So I think it's important for someone to actually verify that. And that's the only reason I'm talking about it. There aren't two reasons. That's the only reason I'm even talking about it. That has happened, and it does happen. I do think, and I'd include myself in this, by the way, that one of the reasons that some aren't getting a fuller rise of Kundalini is because we will dissipate that potential in other ways, right. Physically, emotionally, whatever it might be. And so whereas it could rise, then we sort of deviate off here or there.
Path,
yeah, I it's my belief, and I was a very close friend as well as a disciple of Dr. King. And he never spelt this out to me, but I have talked to him about various matters to do with this. And it's my belief that he was a virgin, that he was a complete celibate, that he was that advanced, and not, by the way, that he wasn't, aware of the impulse. No, not at all. I think he's made that very clear. But he completely controlled it throughout his life. I haven't done that. Just to give one example. At all in my life. I won't say at all, but for a long period. And there are other things people can do, and particularly, as I say, leaving the path in any way, or not taking an opportunity when it's presented to you. Those things will dissipate that rise, I think, of Kundalini. But, if we stick to the straight and narrow, as Dr. King would put it, in all ways, and above all, perform our responsibilities to serve, it does happen. And it will, it still has to be controlled.
Within King Yoga, we've been given a tremendous amount of different spiritual practices, and I think we often underestimate how much they actually affect the power of Kundalini within.
Absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about that?
Absolutely. Richard? I've realized it more and more since having this experience and leading up to it. I was actually engaged in a series on Aetherius Radio Live about the path of service leading to what I called Kundalini Heaven. And that was derived entirely from a transmission by the Master Aetherius, from Free Will to Freedom. It's part of that series, From Free Will to Freedom. And I realized that as well as one level of meaning, there's a whole level of meaning which is just relating to Kundalini. And I'll give you just one illustration of that. Sure. He talks about activating karma positively, and he says, its positive rays come down unto you, and the great power moves, but in its entirety, up through the centers. Your brain and mind become open to the forces latent within you, and you become all-powerful and all-knowing. And this was a trigger for me, because I think a lot of people go around and think, well, I just can't do that. And I suddenly thought, I can do this. I think you've got to have that, come to a point where you think, look, I can actually do this.
Yeah.
And it's completely correct. Now, the practices, I mean, yes, because if you think of just, say, prayer, to take that, our core practice, if you like, one is visualizing the energy flowing through the heart center, as well as the palm of the hands. When you focus on the heart center, of course, as well as channeling the energy through the heart center, you'll also start to draw the energies upwards towards the heart center. And as you draw the energies upwards, that must, to some degree, tend to bring about some kind of rise of Kundalini. The practice that hit me the most, though, was the practice of the presence, which I think is embryonic cosmic consciousness. That really, I suddenly saw it for what it is. And when you think about it, it is. You're bringing down the white light. You're bringing up the violet flame. The violet flame comes from the Mother Earth. Kundalini, of course, is a female force because we live on the Mother Earth. I don't know whether it would be a female force if we weren't living on a female planet. It's beyond my pay grade to know. I would doubt it, though.
Sure.
By the way, talking of that, we have here behind us, I should mention, this wonderful symbol. And I'm just going to say what that symbol, it's published in Visit to the Logos of Earth. And I'm going to give a description of what that symbol actually means. It's one that is worn on a particular crest in the spiritual hierarchy of Earth, the Great White Brotherhood. And this is what it means. The snake is the universal representation for the power of Kundalini, and you'll see that this power is controlled exactly and runs through the fist to end in a torch from which spiritual energies are given to the world. So you can, I think, there see 3.5 coils. And that's what that depicts, in case anybody was wondering as they're watching this video. But coming back to the practice of the presence, when you think about it, you bring the white light to the heart center in whichever order you do it, in the violet flame, which is connected to certainly the Mother Earth, the energy of the Mother Earth, which must be connected to Kundalini. So you could say the violet flame practice on its own could, under certain conditions, start to bring a rise of Kundalini, I'm sure. I'm not going to say it's going to happen to everyone. I'm not making any promises, but it certainly could. Then you take these two forces up from the heart center into the golden sphere, which represents the divine spark of God within us all, but also has a linkage, I would say, to the crown chakra. Now, I haven't risen Kundalini, I want to stress, even partially, certainly consciously, to the crown center. I took it, some of it anyway, to the Christ center. So let me just say that straight away. But that's the ultimate state, the all-knowing state. And then the golden rays come down, which is the, if you like, the cosmic consciousness imbuing your whole being, as a result of raising the forces in their entirety up to the highest center in our being.
Yeah.
So you have it in that practice. Okay, it's symbolic for most people, but it could be actual if someone was ready to make it actual. And you can go through a lot of the practices, and they all have an impact on Kundalini. I must stress, though, I think a lot of us, through the years, have dissipated these forces by engaging in activities of various kinds, materialistic activities, for example, what is called actually by the Master Aetherius in this transmission, the materialistic scheme of things, and basic delights. That's what he calls it. Those are the two things you have to detach from. And if we did really detach from those two things, there you are, bingo. Rise of Kundalini, right there. While you are serving, if you're truly serving, I don't mean serving and all the while knowing I'm going to get a good income out of this, which isn't pure.
It's not the pure motive.
I mean, not saying you don't have to earn an income, most of us do.
Sure.
That's one thing. But if you're, the element of it anyway, that you have no personal gain at all from what you're doing other than to help others, that element is going to also, from a sort of technical point of view, bring into being internal forces which are connected to higher chakras, because those are the chakras that want to do that.
Sure.
You know, are motivating you most to do that. So it'll just happen quite naturally. I mean, it's just a natural process that service will bring about. And I want to stress this too. The most potent service that you can perform, it comes back to choose well, or be right, as I also say. You know, you can do all sorts of service. There's lots of service that's good. But there's one kind of service that's, you mentioned Operation Sunbeam, you mentioned the Saturn mission, I mentioned Operation Prayer Power. There's 3 examples. If you can in any way help those, which doesn't mean you've got to be on the teams performing them, by the way. You can help them in other ways through King Yoga, through prayer, through your actions, through supporting the organization which performs them in a, you know, physically, financially, in numerous ways, in spreading the truth about them. All these ways, that's a greater form of service. And therefore the karmic effects will be greater, not that you do it for this reason, but they will be greater for you as an individual. And actually I come back also to motivation. I mean, the thing that brought Dr. King out of cosmic consciousness, as described in the 9 Freedoms, was his awareness of the Mother Earth. And serving the Mother Earth is even higher than serving humanity. Both are linked. You can't do one without the other. But serving the Mother Earth is the greatest possible motive. I've now come across another one which again is linked, possibly could be the greatest motive any of us could have. And that is, as I put it, get out of the way of the galaxy. Because the galaxy is waiting for us. That's why this statement, this is a King Yoga statement, go towards God now. Even a saint cannot reclaim a wasted minute. And Dr. King, that was one of his great aphorisms, and he lived it. He absolutely lived it. And you might say, well, you know, okay, I'm wasting my time. No. You're wasting the Mother Earth's time. You're wasting the galaxy's time. And if that isn't a reason to get your act together, what is? Another thing you asked me earlier about what's different about King Yoga. In some of the other mystical paths, even ones that are taught now actually, there's no sense of urgency. You've got all the time in the world, you'll do it at your right time, you'll choose the path that suits you, when you want to choose it, No, you choose the path through which you can do the most good, and you do it now. That's King Yoga.
What actually happened during your experience, which took place, I believe, on 14th of January 2023, when you dipped your toe in the ocean of Samadhi. So can you please relate exactly what happened?
You'll have to forgive me, because I'm going to... Actually, I wrote it down. Okay. And I'm going to refer to that. It's all on my website, as I mentioned. And I wrote this down actually on the plane, because this happened the night before I went to America for a visit. It was like the most inconvenient time, but it was the time, and I knew it was the time, and I went for it at 11:30 at night. And then I wrote up notes on it on the plane journey to LA, and a little bit more after I arrived there. And I told a few people, obviously Alison, my wife, who was with me on the plane, but a couple of people over there, and one of them said to me, what I think I've said this before, what were you thinking in that state? And I said, you can't think. And that person said to me, well, someone I'm very close to over in America, said, well, you know, Dr. King did, because he wrote it up, you know, in his description. I said, no, he wrote it up afterwards, which is very different. Breathe, restrain, no, I was told. So I followed that guideline, sometimes holding breath in, sometimes out, intermittent breaths between restraints. The lights, that means I saw lights. Which people can see quite readily, I think. And then the third eye seemed to form, violet in colour as usual, but a yellow surround. I think, this is a thought I hadn't entered the state yet, the 3 faces are imposed upon each other rather than next to each other, but I could be wrong about that. Because that centre has 3 faces. Right, yeah. Perhaps you only see the face you're meant to see at any specific moment. Ringing in the ears, building up. These are all the things that I experience when I'm moving in that direction. I could break down that sound, but I don't want to be distracted from my purpose, so I didn't allow myself to get engaged in those phenomena. They just came along, and I moved on. I turn out the table lamp, darkness in the room, which I prefer. I close my eyes, darkness, and then a small dynamic pinprick of white light. I think a lot of people have experienced that, as if to remind me, and then that's gone. The third eye seems to form, but that's not my purpose. I had it in my mind, by the way, because I practiced a lot of clairvoyance, especially clairaudience, but also clairvoyance. And I had it in my mind, I don't want to get an impression any longer. Because when you do clairvoyance and clairaudience, you're gaining impressions. That's what they are. They can be very accurate, very helpful, very useful. And I know that. If, for example, you get a poem and you get it in 3 minutes, which has happened to me, and you're not even thinking about what it means, but you're just writing it down as fast as you can, because you're clairaudiently, you're hearing it. Sometimes you're not even hearing a word, you're just hearing the letters spelt out, and you write them. This is years ago. This has happened to me. And then you read it afterwards and you find that it all rhymes.
Right.
And it's in iambic tetrameters, which you hadn't heard of before. You
Definitely
have to look it up. And some of the language is 17th century language and so on. Then you think, that came to me, if you like, as an impression. But in actuality, it's real. Because you couldn't do that. It'd be impossible. Now, somebody else could say, I don't believe you. And no doubt would. But that's them. You can't worry about that.
Sure.
You know what happened to you.
Exactly.
Somebody say, you just got an imaginary friend or some nonsense like that. But you know it isn't that. You know it's real, and you can see the poem, and it's there.
And you've got validation from other sources
exactly,
as well.
And you get validation. But even so, though, it comes to you as an impression. And this sounds ridiculous maybe, but I got fed up with it. I thought, look, I don't want any more impressions. I want it to be real. I don't want to get an impression of the third eye or an impression of a vision. And I'm not in any way, I mean, they're wonderful things, and please embrace them, the visions and so on, if they come. But I want it to be real. I want to know just like I'm looking at this, even more so I want to look at the third eye. Right. So this is part of how I'd started out going there.
Sure.
But when I got there, I realized that isn't, it did happen, I did see it, but that isn't the goal. That's not the goal. Sure. The goal is God. But it got me going in that direction. So anyway, I have to still the mind, not repress the vrittis, but let them subside into nothing. This is very important. With me, I have had, maybe partly because of all the various clairvoyance I've done, a very active solar plexus center. And it's, to detach from it, even now, can be quite difficult. But that's one of the things that I saw in this transmission from free will to freedom. You have to detach from that aspect. So that was something I'd been working on for some months before this. Now it goes on. A mild pain at the base of the spine, very familiar that, not excruciating as the master described, but discernible, at most a discomfort. Now here I think is an interesting thing.
It is, yeah.
Because the master says that when you raise Kundalini, it's an excruciating pain. And I'm not going to say it isn't, but I'm going to say this, that in his case, first of all, the only karma he had was any that he'd taken on himself, and whatever he had picked up in his early life, whatever, that might have come, his childhood, in other words, and so on, prior to that, in this particular life. Because he didn't have former lives. He had fleeting visits, but he didn't have former lives. And he didn't have karma as we know it. But he was on a different path, though, and he was forcing Kundalini.
Yes.
So I'm giving an opinion here, because somebody might have a different experience. But I don't necessarily think that it's going to be exactly the same. Which, again, I think is one of the reasons I've been sort of guided to speak about this. Because we aren't forcing Kundalini.
No,
it's been in my, he did this in 10 years. I've been on this path of King Yoga, you might say, avidly, for over 50 years, before this happened. And as I say, made my mistakes and so forth, but on this path, without condition of opportunity. I've taken all, within reason, all the opportunities I was offered, haven't fulfilled them as well as I could have done. I want to stress that, very much so. But anyway, so it's very, very different. And in that sense, I think it could well be different. For me, it was. I think another thing is that you can have some of these experiences. I'll give another example. Some of the old yogis will talk about the ineffable bliss, the great peace. They'll almost describe samadhi as a blissful state. I don't think it's the right word, because bliss is a feeling.
Sure.
It's almost an emotion. It's a very, very elevated one. It can be, if one's fortunate enough. But it's still a feeling, and this state is beyond feeling. So if they say it's blissful, they haven't got there. There's a lot of people who think they've got there who haven't got there, and I could name names, but I won't.
Sure.
And they'll talk about living in the moment, living in the now, whatever, and they'll describe the state. They haven't gained enlightenment, because if they had, they'd know that enlightenment is God consciousness, and they don't know that. That's just one way you can tell they haven't arrived at that. They may have arrived, though, at a very peaceful state, and a good one. So I'm not taking away from that much, but this is beyond that. The pain wasn't excruciating for me anyway. Maybe it will be one day, but I also think, though, that one's had this, and I've had it for a number of years, but not in one big go, as it were. With the master, you feel he went for it, he got there quickly, and he went for it, and he forced it up. And he says that. And he did Kundalini Yoga, which he does not recommend to people to do. But he didn't have the karma that human beings on earth have. I wouldn't recommend physical Kundalini Yoga at all to anyone. This path is not only safe, it's much better. But I do think some of these things can happen along the way, because if you're serving along the way, you're burning up karma, or should be. So
maybe that's why it wasn't so painful for you.
Could be. It goes on, a movement of the sphincter muscles and an immediate reaction in my third eye. So there's a link between that. Vision of greater clarity, a trance-like feeling. Now, the trance-like feeling that I was starting to have in the days before this, a part of me didn't like, and didn't want. That part being my lower self, or my conscious mind. It really didn't want me to move out of its orbit, and it fought it. And this is where somebody with a very active intellect, strangely enough, and an intellect is a good thing. I mean, some people in the spiritual movement make out it isn't. It is a good thing, and it's an essential thing, actually. You read from it, one of the things you have to do to cultivate is intelligence.
Definitely.
And I've seen people do stupid things needlessly, just unintelligent things from their own point of view, which have held them back needlessly. So I'm not saying that it isn't important, but an overactive intellect who's questioning and all that sort of thing, that's a very active focus, active use, shall we say, of the conscious mind. Not necessarily its best use. And that part will try and fight you moving beyond its realm, which is, I suppose, into a superconscious realm. So I had a resistance, and I wrote down here, a slight resistance to this from my mind. But I'd had a stronger one before. I'd even had, no, you don't want to go there. You don't know. You get little fears. What could happen? You could lose control. You could this. You could that. No. And as the Kundalini starts to rise, actually, from the base, you can get a little fear, which is, oh dear, am I losing? Will it ever come down? What will I don't seem to be able to move like I could. These sorts of things, I mean, being a very basic human myself, and can bring it right back down again. So I had to move kind of calmly beyond that. So trance-like start, as I got this resistance, the trance-like state fades. And then again, several times. So this happened several times, this resistance. And when it resisted, then I was out, and I had to keep moving. I'm aware of internal mental resistance. At one point, a concern that I will lose my personality, myself, my being consumed in God. A fear, a slight panic, causing the state to recede, and then back and at it. So that's what happened there. Few things happened. Was it high intuition as referred to by Mars Sector 6 in the Fourth Freedom? So now I started to do things which I think must be what the Mars sector, in that statement I quoted, the transmutation of mental energies upon the plane of inspiration called high intuition. The high intuition I think started to kick in, and something above my normal conscious function started to happen, I think. I might be overcomplicating it. This is the trouble with talking about it, actually.
Sure.
Actually, just before this, I looked up the opening lines of the Tao Te Ching, and I love the Tao Te Ching, and it's something like, the Tao which can be told is not the eternal Tao.
Right.
And once you start speaking, you've almost like lost it. You've lost its real meaning. And I can feel that now as I talk to you.
Sure.
So this is the danger of it. And I very clearly state the aim as a thought. This was coming from inside of me, not from an outside source. I am God, I am Brahma. And so it goes on, I won't read it all. By the way, I think that blissful state, just going back to that for a moment, which I wasn't experiencing then, but people do experience, often after or before an elevated state like this, and sometimes as they, after a wonderful prayer session or something, is what Patanjali might have called frying the seeds.
Right.
And I think I should mention briefly an experience that happened to me, which was that when I went to Hull University, I knew before I got there I was going to find the answer. I'm going to keep this really brief. I'd been searching since the age of 14. I woke up one day and I knew that I didn't know the purpose of life, but I knew that I had to find it.
Right.
And I knew also, I was on the train to Hull, that I was going to find it in Hull.
Right.
And I joined two societies there. One was the Buddhist and Vedanta Society. On the train I joined them, Buddhist and Vedanta, and the other was the mountaineering, as it happens. There's two. And I know I got there, I went to a Buddhist, when I got there I went to the Buddhist and Vedanta meetings pretty quickly. I remember looking up at the sky and I thought, yeah, this can't exist unless there is an answer.
Right.
There's got to be one, otherwise you wouldn't have this.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was pretty clear. And I'm only telling the story because it relates here.
Sure.
To cut a long story short, I discovered a book which I love called Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda, and it contains the sutras of Patanjali. Somehow they were familiar to me. I knew they would take me to this all-knowing space, and of course they take you to Samadhi.
They do, yeah.
Or they would then. I don't say they would now in the way that they're taught,
Sure.
but the essence of them still will happen in the new age. Dr. King has said that, but it's a different path now.
Sure.
But I looked at them and I thought, right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my answer, and I'm going to do it through these.
Sure.
And it was either the next day or within days that I went to a lecture at the Buddhist and Vedanta Society. Who should be speaking but John Holder, whose name then was Sam. That was his nickname. But anyway, John gave a talk about prayer and introduced us to the Etheric Society, me to the Etheric Society. And I knew this was greater. And I knew I had to follow it. And this sounds odd, I suppose, but part of me was slightly disappointed. Because I would have to give up this Patanjali Sutra path for my own awakening in order to do something much more important in terms of service and so on. And the promise there was helping the world, not finding your own enlightenment so much, although I'm talking to you here because you do find your own enlightenment. I have no disappointment now, by the way, and I very quickly didn't, but that was one of my first slight reactions, but I knew what I had to do. So in a way, I rejected it. And that's, I think, one reason I relate so much to From Free Will to Freedom, because he says in there, what you reject is laid at your feet.
Sure.
And okay, it's 50 years later, but it happened.
Sooner
I
or
did
later.
dip my toe in the ocean of Samadhi by following this other path, as well as many much more important things, such as working with Dr. King and doing the missions you've talked about and so on. But it still happened, and I could really relate to that. Well, I will say I think it's misunderstood. If you are wanting to go to, I don't know, a football match, and you give it up to come to a 12 Blessings service, you haven't actually sacrificed enlightenment, you sacrificed a football match, which is still good, I think it will give you a good football match karma. If that's what you know. It might do more than that. But you get my point.
Sure.
You've got to really be able to say, to follow this teaching, I've given up my own personal path to enlightenment. If you haven't, and of course on our path of King Yoga, as we've talked, there are many practices which help you in your enlightenment, and it would also mean that when you get the chance, you take it.
Sure.
And I, for one, haven't always done that. That's another reason it's taken me 50 years rather than maybe less, because I haven't seized every opportunity when I've had it.
Sure.
To do it. But anyway, I was seizing it this night in January, and so it goes on. I won't read it all. This is a key bit for me. I am God. I am not one with God, because even that thought is a suggestion of separation. So that was very important to me. Whereas you'll hear a lot of things, and of course this is all language.
Sure.
So whether people mean it, I don't know. But people say, you know, in Samadhi, you're one with God. You're one with this, you're one with that. Actually, no. It's very important to me. I wasn't. I knew I wasn't.
Sure.
I couldn't think. I couldn't even have that thought.
Yeah.
I am one with God. I am God. And whatever you focus on then, you are. Not one with them anymore. That's the transition, I think, that's the transmutation of mental energies. Yeah. It's another way of saying, actually, moving beyond conscious, even contemplative thought.
Like a dissolving of all the barriers.
Yeah. And then there's a movement of Kundalini upwards up the back of the neck and so on. I let that go. I knew that God is all life, so I am all life, and so on. And then I had a few things that I became. I was, because if you're God, you're all. People say, well, where do you see God? How can you see God? Everywhere. You.
Yep.
This. You know, so a mountain, firm, strong feeling, when boulders fall away and break from it, feeling this loss. So as I sort of became the mountain, and a boulder fell away, I felt the loss of that boulder. But still I felt strong and upright and powerful, purposeful, and so on. And I go through various things. I realized even a pebble has a karmic pattern. And I won't say more, I think, because it's all there if people want to look it up on my website, a hedgehog and so on. Things we've talked about before. But yeah, that's the big journey. It's beyond oneness. It is.
Fabulous.
And it's very, very hard to talk about. And what I've just said doesn't do any kind of justice to it at all. Because, for example, if you kind of, you know what you are and you know why you're operating that way, but it's not something you can explain in words. And that's why I think Dr. King's use of the word abstract in his lecture, concentration, contemplation, meditation, is the perfect word. I mean, I had an amazing thing. So after this experience, I didn't know. I thought, well, you know, does that mean I won't be prone so much to, you know, my desires, my basic self, my thing? And, you know, is that dealt with now? The answer is it's decided no. It hasn't gone away, in my case at all.
You haven't sprouted any angel
no,
wings
it's
and
still got to be
floating
dealt
around.
with.
And
I think you're probably more equipped to deal with it.
Sure.
But another thing that can happen is I think you suddenly look at something you've looked at for a long time and you suddenly know what it means. And this happened to me actually in May while doing a prayer to the galaxy, which is again in this book. Okay. And I won't go into it all, but I suddenly realized, and I lay awake for hours for a couple of nights as a result of this. Because I kind of knew then that the galaxy was, in essence, above manifestation. Now, when I looked it all up later, and Dr. King has basically said that. But it's when you realize it, you're capable of having, perhaps at least at that moment, a realization about something that you've known for 50 years and done for 50 years. Suddenly you know what it means, and it's that, I think, is the satisfaction, if you like, I think, that's being described here.
Right. Thank you
as
for that.
opposed to believing it. Believing it's very important.
Yeah.
Having faith is essential. But you've moved to another level. But I want to stress this, not all the time. Because that's a big thing I've learned. You're not walking around in an enlightened state all the time. You're just not. And you couldn't serve if you did.
Right.
So it's not even, you shouldn't even aspire to it. I think service, actually, strange as this may sound, takes a tremendous weight off your shoulders all of a sudden. Because although it's hard work, its very essence is work, and that's what it is, it relieves you of the need to, as some of the old sannyasins had and some of the old Zen masters used to have and so on, I've got to be permanently striving to maintain this state. Because they weren't focused on service, which was a big mistake in my humble opinion. But had they thought, no, actually no, and a great one like Lord Buddha, of course, would know that. Sure. Obviously, I'm not talking about him or some of the great ones, but perhaps a lesser one who had attained possibly samadhi, but thought and believed they had to keep this going. I've actually got tremendous sympathy, if that's the right word, for some of the old ancient teachers, because they weren't really told what to do after samadhi.
Right.
Because I suppose for most people that's not a problem they're dealing with. But it is, you know, you need a sort of guidebook as what do you do after.
Sure.
Well,
sure.
there again, the key is, of course, service, and we're given that guide. And
Yeah.
it's in the 12 blessings, it's in the 9 freedoms, it's in our teachings, it's on King Yoga. You come out and serve. And so you don't have to worry about that. But I think you have to know. And of course, I was really lucky because I spent a lot of time with Dr. King, so I saw a true master and how he would be, both when he was certainly taking a mental transmission, and then how he was when he was, inverted commas, relaxing, which was very rare for him. So that he, you know, I saw him live this very balanced life. I mean, that's one of the miracles about Dr. King, actually, that he was able to live this life despite all the elevated things that were going on with him and in his mission. It's very hard to describe. I now understand why it is, actually, that some of these yogas, and I'm not putting myself anywhere near their category, have not really described what they actually know in that state. Even Dr. King, I think, who's given the best descriptions we have of the state, including, you know, and cosmic consciousness in the 9 freedoms, which chakra is activated, what happens when this chakra is activated. He goes into it all, but he doesn't really tell you exactly what it's like to know, which is that's the enormous thing.
And there aren't many other parts that I can think of, if any, that talk about the Mother Earth in the way that we do in the in King Yoga.
Never mind the galaxy.
No
one has talked about the galaxy as a living being.
Yeah.
And this has changed all science and all religion.
100%.
And that's something I've only realized, as I say, after, actually, not during, after this state. But that's a result of the wisdom that was given to us, you know, by the Master Jesus in this case. And by Dr. King.
Of course.
Because he will make a statement, like, I'll give you an example of a statement that can only come from a master who's entered samadhi himself. Because he'll tell us this, say, a Lord of creation, which the galaxy is, must be greater than that which it creates. What it's created, because you can't create something unless you're greater than that which you create, he'll say.
Right.
And he has said. Therefore, he'll say, a Lord of creation is not in manifestation because it's created manifestation. Now that's completely logical, but it's only logical to someone who knows it. Because an intellectual could debate that, and you know what people are like on this planet.
Sure.
All day, these nosy intellectual types will sort of go on and say, oh, well, how do you know this? And how do you know? But he knows that, and then from that is derived his great wisdom. Or he'll make another statement, which he made in his lectures on the 7th freedom, actually. He'll say, a galaxy, even a galaxy, cannot go back to God as a galaxy. Excuse me, I'm focusing on the galaxy a lot here, but it's just one example of something I've really realized since this state, some months after it actually.
Right, right.
But a galaxy cannot, even a galaxy can't go back to God as a galaxy. It has to transmute all the matter within it. And that's why I say we need to get out of its way, because it's
Definitely.
waiting for us. And if that should get everybody going, not sure it will, but it should. What an amazing, incredible teacher is the Master Jesus.
100%.
He really is. I mean, the 9 Freedoms, which is my favorite teaching, and we're told is a greater teaching than even the 12 Blessings. But the 12 Blessings is the most far-reaching in terms of its content. It's the most elevated content. And it was... I didn't wonder at the time, because you don't wonder when you're in that state, but I wondered afterwards why it was that while I was in that state of actually knowing God, it was the Master Jesus whose vision I had, a vision of the Master Jesus, rather than, say, our Master, Dr. King, or, say, the Lord Babaji.
Right.
And when I thought, wonder why that was, but of course, it's he, the Master Jesus, who's told us the most about God.
Yes.
In the 12 Blessings. So it's and also he's given us these incredible clues along the way, and there's one that mystified me all my life, really, and it's at the end of the 9th blessing. First of all, he says, you will discover a satisfaction beyond all words. And that's true. He's talking about if you do this, if you act in his name, and if you practice the 12 blessings, basically. But the whole path. You will discover a satisfaction beyond all words. So I can see it can't really be described very well in words. In the wonderful lecture, Concentration, Contemplation, Meditation, it's surprising how few words Dr. King gives about meditation. He talks a lot about concentration. Contemplation he takes to levels that I've never seen anyone take contemplation before, that some would call... I think I'm right in saying Swami Sivananda and some other teachers would call a lower stage of samadhi even, probably. And then he tells you technically what samadhi is, you know, the thin band of heat around the head.
Exactly,
or it gives you that description, but he doesn't tell you much about what's going on, and I can see why now. And he just says something like, you'll start to know the why in an abstract way. And I think that's perfect. I think that's a perfect description, but maybe not too helpful. It's like the Ramakrishna parable, which is well known that by many. I think that Ramakrishna described how a student was watching his master. His master was climbing a wall, and over it was this beautiful paradise of a garden, I think, on the other side of the wall. And he watches the master climb it, his master. The master looks over the wall, and he sees this garden, this heavenly paradise, and he looks round for a moment, and the student sees the bliss on his face, and then the master jumps over the wall. But that look on his face is enough for the student then to follow and climb the same
footsteps.
Wall.
Yeah.
Yet even there isn't a description of exactly what's in the garden, you know, and there can't be. I think that's brilliantly put, because it's not even the bliss. Because this extract I was reading goes on. And this is the Master Jesus. Act in my name in this way, and the reaction will be peace, and even something more, something greater than that. And that's what has intrigued me for years, because even on the path, I mean, I would say especially on the path of service, and I'm sure lots of people who see this will know this, you can experience this sort of ineffable peace, this bliss-like state at times in your journey. When you kind of go to the knowing stage, if you like to call it that, it's beyond that, really. It can't be that, because it's not a feeling and it's not a thought. It's a satisfaction of a kind. And even the Master Jesus says something greater than that and leaves it there. So I'm not claiming that I've fully realized what's in the 12 blessings, but I can certainly relate to what is said there now and understand it.
And you've had a taste of it.
And I've had a taste of it. I've dipped my toe in the ocean, yes.
Can you share a little bit about what it means to know God, as opposed to just reading about someone else's experiences and direct perception of God?
I try. But you can only go so far, you know, that's the problem with it. And you can't really, if you could put it into words, then it wouldn't be what it is, I think.
Sure.
But however, when you develop psychically, which is something I've done a lot, as you know, and I've done channeling and so forth, and when you can really tune in to something, and I'm sure there's lots of people who will know this from experience, who are watching this maybe, you can pick up the thought. Let's just say the thought of a bad person, what we might call a bad person, someone who's not behaving well or something, and you tune into them. Let's say, I don't know why you would, but let's say you did.
Sure.
You would know what they're thinking, what they're feeling. It wouldn't be at all pleasant, that experience. And likewise, if you tuned into a saintly person and really did it well, you really contemplated, you would be able to pick up those saintly thoughts, those saintly feelings. And if you were good enough, you could start to even know about their past, maybe even their future, maybe even at some point their past lives, although you would never tell them.
Sure.
And things like that. That would be a very advanced state of contemplation and it's a very commonly said thing, I picked up your thought. You could do that. You could take it to feelings, which is clairsentience. You can pick up how someone feels. They might be hiding it or trying to, but you know. It might be an animal. It might be a place, but you can really tune in. When you know God, or when you enter this state, which is a trance state, that's something I had to realize. I should have known, because Dr. King's he's called it samadhic trance.
Of course,
it's very clear. But there was a couple of obvious things that I hadn't taken on board. That was one. It's a trance state. It's a positive trance state, but it is a trance state. So you bypass or surpass. Actually, you quoted the 9 freedoms. There's this wonderful phrase. It's the transmutation of mental energies upon the plane of inspiration called high intuition.
Beautiful.
And that's what happens. Right. And so it's a transmutation, actually, is a better way of looking at it, especially in this day and age. And so you've risen it up. You're in that trance state. So you've therefore, you might say, negated, completely detached from the conscious mind, which is why you're not thinking. Because people said to me, people very close to me said, what were you thinking when you were in this state? You can't think. So that's one thing. And of course, the other little thing that I did realize along the way is, of course, you've got to go through each center. That, again, should have been obvious. Sure. But you can't sort of go straight to the Christ center. Of course. You've got to go through each one, step by step, to raise the Kundalini. It's obvious, but it's still, I sort of be reminded as I was doing this along the way. It took me a matter of months. As I say, it's all recorded on my website. But the difference is this. When you're in that state and your how can I put it, your focus, I'll just use that word, goes to a bad person. Right. You are that person. You're not picking up their thoughts or their feelings or even who they were in a past life. You are them because you are God. And with the saintly person, you are that person. If it happens to be a hedgehog, you are the hedgehog. You are the stone, you are the mountain. You know something of how they feel, yes, of course, but you know more than that in that moment. You know why they feel that way, and why, more than why they feel that way, which is, you could perhaps pick that up anyway through contemplation, you know why they have to pursue that line of experience. Right. And that, I think, is the satisfaction.